Here we go. Welcome, welcome. My name is Ivy Sweeting, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here tonight. I am the Assistant Executive Director of Boston Faith and Justice Network, and I will be moderating tonight's uncomfortable conversation on mass incarceration. I also come to the table with 10 years of experience working with systems-involved youth, 7 of which I have worked on the ground very closely with gang-involved youth, young adults, and their families across the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In my full-time role, I currently serve as the Director of Reentry for Straight Ahead Ministries' newest location here in the city of Boston. Boston Faith and Justice Network is on a mission to call and equip Christians to live just and generous lives. As a part of that mission, nearly 2 years ago, we began this uncomfortable conversation series. In that, we seek to learn together about issues of injustice from those with lived experience, those doing the work, and those with expertise. From there, we offer ways to engage in continued learning and as donors, activists, and volunteers. As followers of Jesus Christ, we are called to this work of justice and generosity, and we hope that this series is a way that helps us all find ways to advance his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. For the first time, we have chosen to focus on one issue for a series of multiple conversations. And why are we doing this? We're doing this because mass incarceration is an injustice that involves multiple intersecting injustices, and we will unpack all of that in the coming months. We're looking forward to future panels, which will examine more closely the issues of reentry, as next month is the Second Chance Month. Racism and that Black incarceration, mass incarceration is Black incarceration, and the ways in which wealth impacts the system from arrest to release. And the systems treat you better if you're rich and guilty versus poor and innocent. But before we get to our amazing panelists who are with us tonight, I just want to briefly define what we are talking about when we say mass incarceration. So the US incarcerates more people than any other nation in the entire world. The US prison population increased 500% in the past 40 years alone. Most research has found that for every 10% increase in incarceration rates between 1980 and 2000, that crime was only reduced by 2 to 4%. A study from Vera Institute of Justice found that since 2000, increased incarceration hasn't reduced the crime rate at all. Misguided drug laws and harsh sentencing requirements, especially pertaining to crack cocaine, have produced profoundly unequal outcomes for communities of color. The results have decimated minority families. Black men in particular have been victims of the wars on drugs and on crime. Although rates of drug use and selling are comparable across race and ethnic lines, Blacks and Latinos are far more likely to be criminalized for drug law violations than their white counterparts. And although minorities use and sell drugs at a similar rate as whites, the proportion of those incarcerated in state prisons for drug offenses who are Black or Latino is 57%. 1 out of 4 Americans are locked up behind bars here in the so-called land of the free. Elizabeth, who is our executive director, is engaging live with our viewers on Facebook and will be providing some general information, resources, and additional links in the comment section throughout the evening. And she will also be taking questions from the audience for our panelists to answer at the end of the night. So without further ado, I want to start by introducing our amazing panelists. And I'll have each of you share with us your role, your connection to mass incarceration, and also asking you to explain where your work intersects with the issue at large that we are discussing this evening. So Craig, I'll have you go first.
Thank you, Ivy, and thanks all for your participation. My name is Craig Parker. I work for the Navigators. I serve as the city director, giving oversight to our ministries, both on college campuses and the workplace. But for 5 years, I've been doing work at the Suffolk County Jail, downtown Boston. 5 years ago, a woman invited me to participate in a jail Bible study called Soul Care. And a team of us, there were about 6 of us who were going in weekly and meeting various inmates. And I had the privilege of doing that for about 3 years. After COVID hit, we were unable to go into the jail, but what we've been doing is developing a network of friends who are interested in serving those affected by incarceration. We're trying to build a coalition of churches. We've also done some research to learn about what are the existing needs of prisoners, what are the churches doing about it, what are the secular agencies doing about it. So we've established a network of service providers, a database of service providers. And then as we're trying to build a coalition of churches, we'd like to do 4 things. We'd like to do soul care for those who are presently housed. Again, we're focusing, because we're in Boston, primarily on the county level at the Suffolk County Jail, but also we'd like to do reentry care, family support, and then also addressing the policies on a governmental level that perpetuates incarceration. And I'll tell more about my experience in a little bit. So go ahead.
Thank you so much, Craig. It's a pleasure to have you this evening. Greg?
We're sure to get those 2 names confused before the end of the night.
We'll figure it out.
We will. Hi, my name is Greg Kaplitz. I'm the Business Engagement Manager at Community Work Services. Community Work Services is a 145-year-old nonprofit agency whose sole mission is to help people who have barriers to entry re-enter the job force. I was hired there about 2.5 years ago, about a year after I was released from federal prison. I was brought there along with another gentleman by the name of Tim Hughes, and our sole purpose, in fact, the reason I get up and go to work every day is so that I can figure out ways to help people, my brothers and sisters who are in prison, who have been there and get out, to have a life that prevents them from going back on the merry-go-round and going back to prison, which is really what the system wants. I'm fascinated with the dollars and cents program that you're going to do later on, because it really is about money. It costs the Commonwealth of Massachusetts roughly $65,000 a year to house someone in prison for a year, to put a man or a woman in a cage, when they could spend a small fraction of that, teach them a living skill, help them get a job, help them get housing, and get a productive member of society out of it. But the powers that be prefer it that way. There's a lot of vested interest that prefer it that way. We have a lot of interesting programs we'll share with you. I just want you guys to know that I'll appear on any panel, I'll speak to any group, I'll show up anywhere you want me to. Just ask me, I'll be there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you here. And Isaac.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ivy, for having me tonight. My name is Isaac Yablo. I wear multiple hats. I'm employed by the city of Boston within the newly formed Office for Black Male Advancement, and I do policy and research there. I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of Massachusetts, Boston in the sociology department.
Thank you so incredibly much. And you're such a humble man. It's such a pleasure to have all of you here. There's so much knowledge, so much resources, and so much passion here in this space. And I'm just so incredibly thankful for this opportunity. So we'll start with the first general question that any of you or all of you can answer. What effect does mass incarceration have on families and the community at large? We know, 1 in 17 is a chance of white men going into prison, but 1 in 3 for Black men.
I think Greg touched on it earlier when he said the merry-go-round. So I think I'll let him go.
Thanks, Isaac. Mass incarceration is a big business, and that's simply what we have to understand. It's easier and cheaper for them to put Black and brown men in prison than it is to put someone like me in prison. Didn't stop them from putting me in prison, but it's cheaper and easier. And the system needs to be fed. and it's fed by people going to jail. But the thing about what we focused on, the $65,000 number, that's only talking about the cost for the individual who's housed in prison, the man or woman in a cage. It doesn't talk about the impact on their family and their children and their mothers and their fathers and their sisters and their brothers and their wives and husbands and that whole group, because incarceration has an impact. The people who come out and because of the rules can't live with their family because they're in a public housing unit, and no one with a felony can live in a public housing unit.
Mhm.
Or a man who made his living in construction comes out and finds out he can't have his license anymore because the rules say he can't. So we're working to get legislation passed at the state level called a rehabilitation certificate, which will allow people who've done their time to apply to a court. It says this person has demonstrated that they're working towards rehabilitation, and that will qualify them to get the things that they currently are prohibited from doing. Housing is essential. No housing, you're on the street, you don't have its address, you don't have a job, you don't have a job, you don't have money. It's literally that simple. And it's the impact is amazing. We've worked with several reps whose own family is in prison. It's not a socioeconomic problem. It's a problem across the board, but much, much more among the BIPOC population. And we understand that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as you mentioned, even after paying your debt to society, you're still branded. You come out with a Corey and it has so many barriers, whether that be to housing, which, is a very big barrier, education, employment, your rights to vote, and healthcare. So it definitely causes a ripple effect on the community. Did Isaac or Craig want to answer that before we get into the specific questions?
Yes.
just-
Yeah. Go ahead,
go
Craig.
ahead.
Go ahead. So
Well,
I was gonna say just what you said, Greg. Families are also impacted by it. It's not only the individuals that are quote unquote behind the wall. There's ripple effects that impact generations that come after the individual or individuals that have been incarcerated. Right now, based on work that I've done, for example, in the city of Boston, there's been kind of generational trauma that a lot of the youth in certain neighborhoods feel because of mass incarceration, because of the war on drugs, et cetera. So it really doesn't only impact the individual that's going into custody, it impacts the generations after, the present generations, like Greg said, the mothers, and et cetera. I mean, even in the community, if you're thinking about the impact that a physical structure that houses people that are incarcerated, what that can kind of how that can stigmatize the community as well, right? Just the physical being and the actual structure of whether it's a prison or a jail, that comes with stigma too, right? So going back to, you ran down some of the numbers, Ivy, we have over 2 million people incarcerated, a 500% increase over the last 40 years. There's right around 6,200 facilities that we house people in. And to Greg's point earlier, we can be spending a lot of that money. By the way, many of these facilities are privately owned for profit, right? So we could be using that money to adequately rehabilitate people, but we're not doing that. We're spending it on incarcerating people. 1 in 3 Black men, 1 in 6 Latinx men, 1 in 18 Black women, right? So the numbers speak for themselves.
all I would add is that according to in 2019, about 54% of inmates are parents with minor children, including more than 120,000 mothers and 1.1 million fathers. 2.7 million children have a parent behind bars. 1 out of every 28 children has a parent who's incarcerated. And 2/3 of these children's parents were incarcerated for nonviolent offenses. And it's predicted that 70% of children with an incarcerated parent will spend time in the criminal justice system in their lifetime. And then, as just what you said, if you link one average of 3 family members per individual, 1 out of every 4 Americans have a family member with a felony record. And so it affects all of us. And then another estimate my friend Ed Gaskin has mentioned to me is you mentioned, Greg, it's $55,000 a year in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to incarcerate someone, but over a lifetime, it can be $3 to $5 million of what it costs to incarcerate someone, and then the ripple effect of those negative, the loss of income, and how this has decimated families.
Absolutely. You know, the numbers are absolutely alarming. And the first set of questions that I want to transition to are specific to you, Isaac. And we've talked about some of this a little bit already, but can you describe, you know, the makeup of today's prison population, and what role does the legacy of slavery, you know, segregation, Jim Crow, and racism play in our policies of mass incarceration?
Yeah, I mean, the current layout, like I said, is right around 6,200. I think that I try and keep the number off the top. I think it's 6,190 something, right? Physical places where we house people that are incarcerated. Obviously, I think that the common perception based on stigma and you know, there being some truth to it is that there are more Black people locked, specifically Black people, not necessarily all people of color, but just Black people locked up than there are other races. That's not true. There's actually white people are locked up the most in the United States. That's just because there are more white people that live in the United States. If you look at the ratio, though, of the number of Black people that reside in the United States, and then looking at the number of Black people that make up the prison population, that's where it really becomes staggering, that 1 in 3 number, right? So, but then, you know, grouping together Black people, Latinx community, quote unquote, you know, Asian and American Indian, other communities, you know, it makes up more, right? But so that's, you know, kind of the racial makeup. Obviously, you know, Jim Crow, who played slavery, systemic racism, has played kind of like a foundational role in situations surrounding mass incarceration. But there's also very specific things that I think have factored into that. Bail being like, you know, extremely high bail rather, right? So people can't afford to bail themselves out, and having extremely high bail on cases that are very, very kind of quote unquote petty, for lack of a better words. And then coupled with that, having very harsh sentences attached to very petty crimes, mandatory minimums, 3 strikes laws, truth in sentencing laws, where you actually have to say, I believe, you know, Greg might be able to have, I think it's 85% that you're required to serve when you get, you know, arrested in your house in a federal facility. So I think, you know, history, systemic racism, slavery, the way that we group others in the United States, kind of, we have this bootstrap mentality, put on your bootstraps, and if you can't, it's on you. And, you know, if you turn to other ways of trying to provide for your family, then we'll lock you up. And that's been the way that we've kind of operated in this country, you know, for the last 100 years. So I think that's where we are. That's where we are now. But then, you know, again, very specific things. The war on drugs played a major role in the current makeup that we're seeing right now, and specifically the extremely high percentage of African Americans and people of color that make up the population that is incarcerated in the United States.
Right. And you mentioned, you know, the war on drugs and the differences in, you know, crack versus cocaine. It violates the elements of core fairness, you know, that it's the exact same substance in 2 different forms, but yet one drastically, you know, disproportionate measures for the Black and brown community. But, you know, cocaine is seen as more of a sophisticated drug, and it doesn't have that attachment to it.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of racializing things that are, like you just said, the exact same thing at its core. I mean, the method of consumption, right, is what we're talking about at this point. and the location of the distribution of the substance, right? And then that I don't know, I've heard 11 to 1, 3 to 1, 10 to all these different numbers, but either way, it's just like it was blatantly you're charging Black people with a steeper crime for the exact same a steeper sentence for the exact same crime, rather.
Right.
And even when the legislation was changed, it was not made retroactive. So these guys who in the 90s and the early 2000s got 25 and 30-year sentences for 10 grams of crack are still in jail.
Yeah.
And only now are they starting to make it. And with the federal system, you're correct, Isaac. They mandate 85% of your sentence must be served, and there is no parole in the federal system. It was done away with. So if you get a 25-year sentence in the feds, you're doing 22 years.
Right.
It's a long ass time.
Right. Absolutely. So Isaac, what responsibilities would you say individual American citizens have with regards to shaping the country's criminal justice system?
Well, I mean, there's obviously the United States Constitution, constitutional law that all individuals that practice law in the United States are bounded by, right? So there's the body of laws that exist that we've operated on as a country since we've been founded, right? Then there's the actual people that make up the actors within the criminal justice system. It's debated within the Supreme Court whether we can change constitutional law. That's kind of long-term thought process. What we can do right now is we can think about the individuals that are practicing law and the individuals that interpret this constitutional law. So as a responsibility, as kind of as a civically engaged individual, on the city, state, and federal level, you have to vote, right? That's people always say there's this past election season, everyone had just vote. I don't even care who you vote for, just vote, right? And it's because the individuals that we vote for are the individuals that make up the system that we operate and are bounded by. Again, with full respect to constitutional law, with the amount of agency that individuals that practice law have, we should be voting for people that have an accurate understanding, not only of the historical context, but also the ways in which the system needs to be changed to factor in the historical context, right? So I think that that's our responsibility as civically engaged people. We have to take part in deciding who is going to enforce law, interpret law for the masses, right? Beyond, if there's people that want to help the people campaign, if you want to do that, go ahead. But just at the bare minimum, we have to vote and we have to be present and care about who is in a position of power and enforcing law. Again, whether it's at the city, state, or federal level.
Right.
I was going to add, some of you may know Nika Eligardo, who is the state representative for Roxbury Dorchester, formerly working at the Emmanuel Gospel Center. She's now in the State House. And I just put in the chat here, she single-handedly has launched a commission on structural racism and corrections on a State House level, and is looking, will be doing an initial finding of her research, I think, in the end of April. And she certainly welcomes our support. She's also running for state senate, but she views herself as an abolitionist, and she says that this is, structural racism and corrections is endemic. It's been going on for decades, if not centuries, and it'll take a long time to address it. But she is doing this on a state level.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm just sending that information over to Elizabeth so that she can share it in the chat on Facebook as well. But we're going to transition over to you, Craig, for the next set of questions. What would you say is the benefit of supporting higher education in prisons? And what role can prison education or programming in general play in reducing recidivism rates and mass incarceration as a whole?
Sure. One, before I try to answer that, one sobering statistic is that state and private prisons house 83% of the American prison population, but 73% of them do not offer college level courses, which is staggering when you think about it. And 56% of private prisons do not offer vocational training, which is also staggering when you think about it. And then on a county level, where I've been mostly working, there's very little programming in terms of vocational training, and never mind college classes. But the benefit is, I most have learned from an organization called Partakers here in the Boston area. The director is Arthur Bembury. He himself is formerly incarcerated, got a college degree from Boston University while he was incarcerated, and about 25 years ago, after getting out, took over with the organization is called Partakers. I've put it in the chat here, and they work primarily in 5 Massachusetts state prisons, and they have a recidivism rate of about 2%. And so the problem is not many people are qualified to be admitted into the program, but those who are admitted and then go on to receive either an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree upon their release, the opportunity is for them to pursue vocation and ultimately to flourish in our society. So the benefits are enormous, but the challenges are very few prisons actually have college education programs.
The numbers that you shared are definitely alarming, and we all know, the benefit to education. And I'm really thankful for, the work that you are doing. And I'm wondering, what can individuals do to volunteer in prison education or reentry programs?
Again, the program I'm most familiar with is Partakers. It's partakers.org. And what Arthur is doing, he has about 400 volunteers. And they are working with, I think, 5 universities, Tufts University, Emerson College, Harvard University, Boston University, Boston College. And then they're working at 5 institutions. I know about Concord specifically. And they welcome mentors who they try to assign 4 to 5 mentors per enrollee in the program. And a mentor commits to 1 evening a month, and because they have a team of 4, they can have 1 evening a month, and they walk directly with the inmate through his or her education class. I also host a micro church on Sunday morning on incarceration. One of our members is a professor at Tufts University. She teaches American religion at Tufts University, and she's been teaching at MCI Concord for several years now. And then through High Rock Church, we've connected with Partakers, and we have about 50 people through High Rock Church who are involved with it's called High Rock Beyond Bars, and a number of them have signed up to be mentors in the Partakers program. And so the best way to get involved is to call or email Arthur, and I've put his email and his phone number here in the chat.
Thank you so incredibly much, and that's so warming for me to hear, that there is that amount of volunteers that are interested in going in and meeting with inmates that are behind bars. I know at Straight Ahead Ministries, we also have volunteer efforts that, we have individuals, church leaders coming into the juvenile facilities to meet with youth and young adults as well. So thank you very much, Craig, for sharing those resources. Okay, Greg, we're going to come over to you. How is someone's race, sexual orientation, physical or mental abilities, or gender identity treated in this country's criminal justice system?
What a great question. Let's start with the disabilities first. Mm-hmm. Depending on which set of statistics you look at, roughly 60% of the people in jail have some sort of an issue. Could be a learning disability, could be an attention deficit problem, could be an emotional or psychological trouble, some problem that relates, could be a serious health issue. And what happens is the system itself doesn't the average reading level is a sixth grade reading level. These statistics are damning, and there's nothing that's being done. Most prisons, Isaac's statistic of roughly 6,200 prisons, most prisons are mandated in some fashion to offer a GED or a high set program. And they'll have 2,000 people in the prison, they'll have 35 people in a high set program. What is necessary is some sort of a broad-based program. So what we've done at CWS is we believe that the solution is to provide workforce training to inmates as they approach release, and then integrate that with post-release soft skill services. Many of these guys are coming out. We don't realize how much technology has changed. I was gone for 4 years, and I came out and my phone was a brick. I at least had a phone, but it was a brick. I drove through downtown Boston and said, where the hell did all these buildings come from? And I was sitting in a DTA office in Malden in 2019 saying, okay, now what? And they gave me some SNAP benefits after I'd been sent out of prison with the clothes that I walked into prison with, and nothing. And that's what the system sends you out the door with, nothing. Often they don't even provide you. I was in prison at the Federal Medical Center in Devens, right in near Massachusetts. So they send you out the door at Devens. How do you get from Devens anywhere? Devens is not nowhere, but you can see it from there. There's no way, there's no buses, there's no trains, there's nothing. I was fortunate. I had a family member come get me. So they finally, after a lot of abuse and complaints, started buying people bus tickets. And they would drive them to Worcester and let them get on the bus. Before that, they would just send you out the door. So we're currently running a pilot program with the Suffolk County Sheriff. As Craig mentioned, most of the counties have very little programming. Suffolk County, on the other hand, Sheriff Tompkins is a very forward-thinking man. He gets it. He understands that changes need to happen. And so we're not the only program. NECAT runs a culinary program. We're currently running a commercial cleaning program in. We're talking with Essex County. We're talking with the DOC. But the point is, you need to empower people. You need to give them the skills. If you put them on the street, you don't give them any skills, you don't give them any support, then you are surprised when they reoffend. How are they expected to support themselves?
Right.
Surely not on $192 of SNAP benefits a month. And that's the current benefit for a single man. So I encourage anybody on this call, if you have somebody who needs assistance, needs a path. I got a call today that's the call I hate to get. I got a call from a state trooper looking for one of my guys. I got to tell you, it breaks my heart when I lose one. But I know it's going to happen. I get the math. But I'm going to focus on saving the ones we can save. So if you've got somebody out there and they need job skills, they need help to a real job, because we don't train people to go to work stocking shelves for minimum wage for the rest of their life, because that's just going to lead you to a reoffending again. You need to be in a minimum wage. You need to be in a living wage job, something that's got a path to $18 to $22 at a minimum, so that you can afford to put a roof over your head, food on your kid's table, and be a contributing member of your society, because that's the thing they take away from you.
Mm-hmm.
They take away your manhood. If you're a man, they take away your womanhood. They turn you into an object. They take away from a mother her children. What worse thing can you do? They make a man, men, Isaac, Craig, you were brought up this way. We're supposed to be, I was brought up in a religious household. I was supposed to be the provider. They put you in jail. How do you provide? You don't. You become a burden. You become the person they have to send $50 to the commissary so you can buy what you can't get in the prison. And every time your family sends you money, it makes you shrink just that much more. I knew I was going to prison, so I went to work. I was able to put some money away. And fortunately, my sister sent that money to me. But it ran out, and then she had to send money. And every time I had to ask her to send money, it broke me just a little bit more. The last words the prison guard said to me when I left that prison was, "See you soon, Caplets." And my words were to say, "You'll never see me again. And I'll do whatever I can to make sure no one else comes back to this place." And that's really what it's all about. And that's what we're all here for, to see if we can stop people from being in cages, because nobody belongs. I shouldn't say that. There are some very few exceptions. Violent, dangerous people, maybe. Most people, the vast majority, no. Sorry, this gets me wound up, guys.
No, there's no need to be sorry at all. There's so many points that you touched on, the unfair and inhumane treatment, the lack of support in preparing for reentry. And I'm so incredibly thankful for the work that you're doing, because young people and returning citizens are able to obtain jobs, but maintaining them, when they're also worrying about a roof over their head, or, support for their children or the rest of their families, or, just putting food on the table, there's incremental barriers. And what may seem very easy for us, in getting an ID may seem like moving a mountain for someone who is just returning out of custody. And the empowerment and the support that you mentioned, the words that a guard had mentioned to you as you're walking out the door, that I'll see you again. But, there's people like us that really have a heart for empowering other people and building them up. And, one of the things that you mentioned is that, giving people skills. And what I've found is that there's all of us, we all have gifts, we all have talents and treasures. And some of those skills that we already have, the individuals may be utilizing them in the wrong way, but all of those skills are transferable. It's really a blessing to be able to pull those skills out and enhance those skills. And I really appreciate all of the work and the experience that you bring to the table, Greg. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
So the next question, what does life after prison, and you talked about this a little bit, but typically look like for the returning citizens that are walking through the doors at community work services?
So we have what we think is the only way it can really work. We have an integrated approach. So people go through skills training, which is hard skills. They learn a job, they learn a trade. But they also go through job readiness training. So they learn how to do things. For instance, how do you use job boards? How do you handle electronic applications? How do you do an interview and handle the question, why do you have a 3-year gap in your resume? Where were you? Now they can ask that question. They can't ask you if you were in prison.
Right.
And we actually mock interview with people so that they understand that a lot of times guys and gals will cost themselves the job.
Mm-hmm.
They'll volunteer information that they don't have to give. Absolutely. I did my first crime when I was 14. I did my first sentence. I was in DYS. I was released. I did my first. Mm-hmm. Don't stop. Mm-hmm. You're shooting yourself in the foot. And that's what some of the skills we try to have. And then we have job coaches who help people find jobs. And then theoretically, there's 1 year of job coaching. That is the only untrue statement you'll hear from me tonight. It's not really 1 year. That's what the paper says. We don't turn anybody away. Come back to us 2 years later, come back to us 3 years later. We're going to help you. That's what we're here for. Well, if you need to brush up, you decide you want to change your trade, you need to get a new job, the company closed, it went out of business, you got laid off, come see us, we'll help. But that's what it has to be. And then you got to work with people. We're trying to work closer with the city of Boston. Isaac, your old group, SOAR, we know that there's groups out there that have connections that are trying to change and intervene with the kids before they do serious time, where they're still in little boy prison, not big boy prison.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like you mentioned, that consistency in building those relationships. And, it may be 2 years since I've seen you, but you walk in my door and it's like, we're here for you. Like there's no time
Yeah.
that has elapsed. The
Ivy, you
relationships
actually
that we
brought up
build.
one good point, Ivy, I wanted to mention.
Yeah,
The thing
absolutely.
about IDs, and Isaac knows this as well as anybody, the state of Massachusetts identifies someone, puts them in prison, obviously knows who they are, yet refuses to issue them a state ID when they leave prison, which they require to get a job, but won't help them get the documents they need to get a job.
Right.
So one of the things that we're pushing is with the legislature is that they mandate that the DOC and the counties issue state IDs. They used to be able to do it, and they took it away because it cost, money.
Mhm.
So if as you guys are on this call, if you see something, talk to your reps, talk to your senators and say, these men and women should come out with an ID. You obviously know who they are. You put them in prison.
Very great point.
Sorry.
Craig, did you have something you wanted to add to that? Sorry.
Well, just there are 44,000 legal obstacles for people getting out of prison or jail. And never mind, how do you get an ID? How do you get a debit card? How do you get a credit card? How do you get a banking account? How are you going to find housing? Who's going to employ you? And you can't get a license. You can't get a real estate license. There are all these obstacles. And so also on a legislative level, we need to chip away at it bit by bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many different layers, and that highlights another reason why we're going to be talking about this for the next few months. So I do have one last question before we open it up to the questions from our viewers on Facebook Live. God provides free will, and this question is for anybody to answer. Sometimes, poor decision making leads individuals a seat behind bars, and yet there are so many other factors that increase the chances for imprisonment, as we talked about tonight. How much responsibility should society take to help heal individuals from trauma, broken families, and abuse that is caused by incarceration? I know for me personally, and just thinking of a few different scriptures, that there is a call, for us, for me as a Christian woman, as a servant of God, the Lord requires us to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with Him. We're supposed to give justice to the weak and the fatherless, to maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute, as it's written in Psalms, and to seek justice and to correct oppression. So how are we supposed to do that and help our brothers and sisters heal?
I mean, I think a lot of it is having a heart. The reality is to Greg's point, we don't need to be putting people in cages. If we're talking about healing, whether it's spiritual, biblical healing, period, a cage is not the way to do that. We have a responsibility as a society to understand that we have to disrupt cycles using our own agency. We already know that there's certain groups of people that are predisposed to contact with systems, punitive systems rather, that make up our country. So it's on us to work, going back to the question you asked earlier, how do we, on the ground level, take responsibility and do work? We have to, going back to what I said, we have to vote. We have to actually be engaged. We have to care about these things beyond what we experience in our day-to-day, but just looking at it from a humanistic standpoint. So I think that's a place to start, really. We can write legislation, we can do needs assessments, we can do all of that, but if we don't care about the issue at hand, we're not going to do anything to legitimately solve the problems that we have.
It's a very great point. It's a very great point. It's very true.
Nika Eligardo, I was on a Zoom call with her a few weeks ago. Again, she's a state rep on this commission on structural racism. And she mentioned William Wilberforce. It took him 30 years in the British Parliament to make slavery illegal. And she said structural racism in corrections is a much longer project. She says it's going to take decades, if not a century, to address this. And so we as a society have to look to our own past in terms of what are the factors that contribute to mass incarceration, especially how people are of color affected by this. The other thing I would add to your question is your question is how much responsibility should society take to help? And I would just change your question slightly to say how much responsibility should the church or the household of faith take?
Mhm.
I have here it's called Coming Home. It's a directory, a reentry directory for the city of Boston. It's 100 pages of services for returning citizens, only 3 pages of which are faith-based.
Mhm.
And it refers to, and two Black churches are mentioned, Catholic charities are mentioned, Jewish volunteer services are mentioned. There's not a single, like, quote unquote, larger evangelical church that's mentioned. And again, there are 700 churches in Boston, Brookline, and Cambridge alone, never mind Greater Boston. And so we as a household of faith need to rise to this challenge.
I absolutely agree with you. Straight Ahead Ministries is listed in that Coming Home directory. We actually submitted, and since we just recently opened our center, we didn't make it in the printout, but we are listed online. But I definitely agree that there are more that we need to do as a church, and that's not a building, but all of us in the community and those churches need to respond. And Straight Ahead Ministries is housed within the Tremont Temple Baptist Church, and they're also an intentional partner of the Send Relief Ministry Center, and that's a conversation that I've been having with them as well. So there's definitely further conversations and resources to come. Greg, did you have anything to add?
I just real quick, as you know, Ivy, I'm an observant Jew. So to me, my faith got me through prison. And I actually got closer and more observant in my faith in prison. It was literally what got me through every day. So I think it's crucial that all people of faith, we all worship the same Hashem, the same Lord. And we have to understand that it is all of us as a responsibility. It is in the Old Testament. It is certainly in the New Testament. It is our responsibility to help our fellow man, to reach down and to help that person who is charity. In Hebrew, it's called tzedakah. It's charity. It's absolutely a requirement of my faith to give charity. And
Amen.
What better charity is there than to help somebody, help your brother, help your sister, help them leave that awful environment that the state and the federal government decided to create, and help them on their path. I can tell you, there is nothing. Isaac's had these calls, Ivy's had these calls, Craig's had these calls. There is nothing better than that call from one of those people you helped 2 or 3 years down the road, and they start out with, "Thank you."
Mm-hmm.
It's the best feeling, it really is. And
is.
we can all do it. Just give a little, man. Help a little. Make a call. Talk to your reps. Help your church. Make a donation. Be a mentor. Do something. You'll feel better for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there are a few questions that came in on Facebook. Let's see. So Craig mentioned the special commission in the Massachusetts legislature, but are there any pending laws at the state or federal level that we should be aware of that are looking to make just changes to the system? And is the ID issue Greg mentioned currently before the legislature?
We are trying on that issue. We are trying to get it sponsored. There are 2 bills currently in front that we're supporting. One is a clarification of the Corey reform law that was passed a couple of years ago, and that second one is the rehabilitation certificate. The rehabilitation certificate will go a long way because it will mean that if you have that rehabilitation certificate, Boston Housing cannot say you cannot live with your children. If you have that certificate, they're going to be required to allow you to sign on that lease. So those are the two bills. We're trying to get something sponsored in, it'll be too late for this year, but in next year's session, we're going to try to push the IDs thing. It's a small item. They have the capacity. They literally just push a button, spit the ID out. Cost them whatever the cost of the blank is. Peanuts.
Okay. And one other question, are there ways churches can get involved specifically?
I can just speak to that. A couple different things. High Rock Church that I worship at in Arlington, we've been hosting a series called Rethinking Incarceration. I've put it in the chat by Dominic Gilliard. It's a 6-week series. In fact, I'm going to be on a call in just a few minutes for our Wednesday night group. And that will educate you in terms of the things that Isaac mentioned on a wider scale. It'll educate you in terms of the history of mass incarceration. We are trying to build a coalition of churches, as I mentioned, and we want to do 4 things. We want to resume our soul care Bible studies. We welcome volunteers to do that. We also want to provide reentry care. And a simple initiative would be providing backpacks for returning citizens. We would love to have a $100 gift Visa card, a Charlie card, a backpack with change of clothes, and we're trying to build the infrastructure to make that happen. We also have a letter writing ministry called PEN. This is out of Central Square Church. These are just letters that I have from inmates at MCI Shirley. And we have a letter ministry called PEN, which stands for Prison Epistle Network. And there's ways of corresponding with both men and women, and then just developing a relationship with them. And then partakers that I mentioned, they're also looking for mentors. It's called, they have an education program, but they also have a program called the Partakers Empowerment Program, which is to provide 2 mentors for 12 weeks upon the release of a returning citizen. And you can contact through partakers. And at High Rock Church, we have a number of people that are now mentoring returning citizens. They walk out the door, they offer 12 weeks of support for them. And I would love, if we're also, as we're trying to build this coalition, we have a design team of people. We're trying to mobilize churches on a wider scale. If any of you would like to contact me to be a part of that, my email and phone number are in the chat.
Thank you so much, Craig, for adding that. And also, Straight Ahead Ministries is looking for volunteers as well, for individuals that are looking to build relationships with young people that are in custody and coming home from juvenile lockup as well. Isaac, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was going to add just there's, sometimes I'm a big fan of not recreating work that already is being done or should be, being done. I know on the city level, Will Dickerson, he oversees Will Dickerson and Tracy Lithcutt, formerly Tracy Lithcutt, but more Will Dickerson now. He oversees faith-based initiatives, and he does a great job. He's very well connected on the community, both within the kind of the spiritual population, but also within the coming home population, if you will. And again, just holding people that are already doing the work accountable. Yesterday, I had an individual walk into, my area in the mayor's office. He did 25 years. He's been home for 3 weeks, and he somehow found our office as a place. And to Greg's point, he didn't have anything. He didn't obtain any sort of educational certifications or degrees while in custody, and he's at kind of the bare minimum, right? And so there's always, so my point with saying that is that the needs are very real, but then there's also people that are not only doing the work but are also being paid to do the work too. So also hold, in addition to working with all the agencies and resources that Craig just mentioned, right? Hold the people accountable that are supposed to be doing the work, whether it's on a governmental level, nonprofit level, or just on a community level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so
One more
much.
thing I would mention is I was at a reentry panel at Suffolk County House of Correction on Monday morning, and in fact, Greg's organization, Community Work Services, was also there. I was representing our faith partnerships, and I met 8 gentlemen who are due to be released in by the end of April, and I prayed with 3 of them. Of the 6 whose names I recorded, or 5 whose names I recorded, 3 of them don't have housing and they don't have employment. One of them is about 20 years old. Another one is in his early 20s. And anyone would be welcome to join me representing your church community in the reentry panels that happen at the House of Correction. It's the last Monday of every month from 9:30 to 11.
Thank you so much, Craig. And I would definitely like to, stay connected with you and supporting those young men, because that's the exact work that I'm doing with Straight Ahead Ministries. We work with youth and young adults from 14 to 24. So I definitely like to connect and support those young men. I do want to be mindful of time. I know there were some questions that came in through Facebook that we won't get to, but we are fortunate to have a few other panels. So we'll make sure that we get as many questions answered throughout the next couple months as possible. But before I do, I'm going to close us out in prayer. But is there anything that any of you would like to add that you maybe didn't get a chance to share, or any resources that you may want to highlight quickly? Okay, no, just wanted to make sure that you all had the space, anything left. So I will close us out in prayer. Oh, gracious and heavenly Father, I thank you for this day, this moment, this opportunity. We know that where 2 or more are gathered, that there you are in the midst. And I thank you for being here with each and every one of us as panelists, and those that are viewing online and may watch the recordings later on, that we have been, having an uncomfortable conversation, Lord God, but allow us to see injustice for what it is. It's a tool and a threat from the enemy to separate and to divide and to allow us to not believe in you. But we believe in you and the power of what you are able to do in bringing us together. There's so much that is going to come out of just this very conversation, and we thank you. I ask that you continue to bless and dress all of the panelists that are on the call, that are doing the work, that you dress them in your full armor, Lord God, that you give them the strength, the wisdom, and everything that they need. We know that we are not fighting against flesh and blood, but against rulers and principalities. And we need you to be able to do this work. So I thank you, Lord God, that we are co-workers in your field and everything that you have allowed us to do in this evening. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I just wanted to, thank you all so very much for your time, your dedication to this work. This is an ongoing conversation. So all of you to keep an eye out for our social media for upcoming conversations over the next few months. It will be information that's provided in our newsletter as well. If you're not a subscriber, you can certainly subscribe today. And BFJN, Boston Faith and Justice Network, is a nonprofit. So if you'd like to support us, please go to our website for further information on how to do so. Thank you all so much for your time and everything that you have provided in this conversation. And I pray that you all have a great, blessed night. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes,
Ivy.
yes. Bye-bye.
You're welcome.